In this tutorial, I am going to teach you the easiest and most straightforward way of integrating Google Login or Google OAuth into your Django REST Framework project or application. Now, there are other traditional ways of integrating Google Login into your Django project. An example is using Django OAuth. But I'm sure if you have tried it, you might have noticed that it is not easy to directly integrate Django OAuth into a Django REST Framework project. It's only easy to integrate it in a Django project. But when you're building an API using Django REST Framework, using Django OAuth isn't easy. In fact, it's near impossible. So that is why I came up with this tutorial. Now there are also other options for integrating Google Login into your Django REST Framework project. But I believe this is the easiest and most straightforward. So what you have here is a README file which I had created, and it basically just outlines all the steps which we are going to be taking in order to build this project. And I'm going to be starting from the beginning, that is even setting up the Django project. So I'm starting off like as if it's a new project. But if you want to skip to the point where we actually start working with Django, that is, sorry, the part where we actually start working on the authentication system, which is creating the user model, then I would advise that you use the timestamps below to skip ahead to this section. Now, I'm also going to let you know that we are going to be creating our own custom user model because we want a way to be able to keep track of how a user registered in our application. So we see here that we have this field called registration method, and it has a choices attribute, and the choices are email and Google. So that would mean that we want to be able to track how a user registered on our website or on our API, whether it's by email, by using email and password, or if it's by using Google. And you're going to see why this is important. It's important because we don't want a user who registered with Google to be able to register with email and password, because then we would have issues. Now, to begin, we are just going to be looking at the flow of how this entire application is going to work. Now, this is the first step. This is a user wanting to sign into our application. So let's just say, for example, our front end application is running on React, right? And a user visits our React application on the front end and they want to sign in. What then happens is they are going to click the sign in with Google button. So the moment they click that sign in with Google button, what React is going to do is that it is going to make a request to Google directly to request a token for that specific user. When you click sign in with Google, it brings up like a pop-up that shows you what Google account you want to sign in with, or it tells you to put in your Google login credentials so that you can sign in. So that is what actually happens during that process. So during that process of it requesting you to select the Google account you want to sign in with, what our React application or our front-end application is going to do is it's going to request a token from Google. Now, when Google receives that request, it is then going to send back a token in step 3. So Google is going to receive that request, send back a token for that specific user on that specific Google account. It's going to send back a token to our front-end application. Now, I want you to note that this isn't just limited to React. You can use several frameworks to do this. This could be React, it could be Vue. In fact, in this tutorial, we're going to be using HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript. So this could be done with any framework like React, Vue, Angular, whichever one that you choose to. And I believe there are libraries for that. For example, I believe React has a library that even renders out a Google sign-in button, which also will help to request the token from Google. But you can just follow with me in this tutorial, and we're going to see how the entire backend and frontend will integrate. So the first step is the user clicks sign in with Google on our front-end application. Our application then requests a token from Google. Google then sends back that token to our front-end application. Now, what does our front-end application do with that token? We are then going to send that token to our backend, which is Django REST Framework. Now, what does Django REST Framework do with that token? Django REST Framework or our backend is going to make a request again to Google using that token that has been provided. Because the user made a request to our front-end application, the front-end application made a request to Google, Google sends back that token. We're then going to send that token to our backend. Our backend is then going to make a request to Google to grab the user data using that token. So the user data will be the email, first name, last name, profile image. You could also get, a bunch of different data, but that is what we're concerned about in this tutorial. So the email, first name, last name, and maybe profile picture if you want. So we are going to then make a request to Google by passing in that token. Now that token is only valid for a certain amount of time. So what our backend is going to do is to send that token to Google. Google is then going to verify that that token actually exists and verify that it belongs to an actual user. So once it has determined that that token was generated for a specific user, it is then going to return the user data back to our backend. Now, once Google returns that user data back to our backend, in our backend, we're then going to perform two operations based on what we're going to perform an operation based on two, conditions. The first condition is when Google returns that user data containing the email, first name, last name, maybe profile image, and so on. Our backend is going to check if a user with that email already exists and they registered with Google, then it means that okay, this user has already registered with Google on our backend before or on our website. So we're just going to generate a JWT token pair. That is an access and refresh token, and we're going to send those tokens back to front end or our React application in this case. But if a user with that email does not exist in the database, we're going to create a new user object in the database and set the registration method to Google. So that way we're able to track that, okay, this user has already authenticated themselves before, they've already registered. We do this to be able to know how this user registered in the future. So to go over it again, we click login with Google on our front-end application. Our front-end application makes a request to Google. Google sends back a token for that specific user. Then our front end is going to send that token to our backend. Then the backend is going to send a request to Google using that token to get the user data, which matches the token, which matches the token, and that token matches a user. So we're able to grab the user data. Google then sends the user data. We're then going to process the data, save to DB, create a normal JWT for authentication. So we're going to either create a new user or retrieve that user from the database, authenticate them, then return a JWT access and refresh token. So the reason why we're returning access and refresh tokens is because we want to enable the user be able to make a request to endpoints, to protected endpoints on our backend. So if, for example, we have a protected route that only an authenticated user can visit on our backend, the client, which is our front end or maybe mobile app, will need to send a request to that endpoint. And it must also contain the token, the access token in the headers of that request so that it can be authenticated. So this is exactly why we're going to return an access and refresh token back to the front end. So that is the flow of exactly how this entire thing is going to work. Now it might seem like a lot, but trust me, as we go on, you see how easy and simple it is. So we're going to move on to the next step, which is setting up the Django project. Now, I had explained that we're going to start this project from scratch. So if you already have a working project, you can just skip up onto the point where I talk about creating a new user model. So I'm just going to scroll to the top. So the first thing it says is create and enter the desired directory for your project setup. Now, I have actually already created the folder which I want to keep all of these projects, all the project files in, and it's called drf-google-auth. Well, if you don't already have a project folder, I want you to create a folder, and once you create it, we can move to the next step. It then says create a virtual environment using pipenv or other means. Now, for me, when I'm creating virtual environments, I like to use the pipenv command, but if you have your own special way of creating a virtual environment, you can do that. You can use your own way. But if you don't have, then you can just follow me. The first thing that you will need to do is run this command, pip install pipenv in your terminal. So just paste that if you don't already have it installed. But for me, I already have it installed, so it will most likely show me requirements already satisfied. Now, the next command that you will need to run in order to create a virtual environment is you need to cd into the location of where you want to create this virtual environment in. So what that means is that you will need to go to the folder where you want to create this virtual environment in. Now, because I am already inside my project folder in my terminal, I can just simply run pip env space shell, and it will create a virtual environment inside this drf-google-auth, and it's going to name that virtual environment drf google-auth. And something else that I like about pipenv is that the moment you create a virtual environment, it automatically activates it. So as you can see here, it says successfully created virtual environment. And then after that, it said launching subshell in virtual environment. So we are rest assured now that our virtual environment has been created. So for further explanation on how pipenv works, if you want to deactivate the virtual environment or exit it, all you have to type is exit. Now, once you type exit, it will automatically exit out of that virtual environment. But if you would like to reactivate it, all you have to run is pip env shell again, and it won't create the virtual environment. It will already know that, okay, a virtual environment already exists inside this current folder, so it will just reactivate it. Now that we have gotten that out of the way, our virtual environment is activated. The next thing that we need to do is we need to install Django and Django REST Framework, obviously, because we're trying to build an API using Django and DRF. So I'm just going to paste that to install Django and Django REST Framework. So after Django and Django REST Framework has finished installing, the next step is that we need to create a Django application called Authentication Project. So you can call it whatever you want, but I would just like to call it Authentication Project because this video is teaching authentication. So I'm just going to paste that Django-admin space / project. So we're going to create a new Django application called Authentication Project. Now I am going to assume that at this point you already have basic understanding of how to set up a Django project. So when I type ls, I can see my projects created. So I'm just going to enter that directory. So cd authentication project. Now the next step is you need to create an app called core. Again, you can call it whatever you want, but I would just like to call it core. I'm going to say python manage.py start app core. And then once I type ls, I can see my projects folder and application folder as well as my manage.py file. Now the next step is open your project in your code editor. Now I already actually have the folder opened in my Visual Studio Code, but for you, I want you to just open it in your, code editor, whichever that is. Now I can see my projects folder and I can see my application folder right here on the side. Now the next thing is it says add core and REST framework to the project installed app settings. So we're just going to proceed to set up our Django projects right now. So I will go to my installed apps and I'm going to add core because that's the name of the application we just created. And we're going to add REST_framework because, obviously we're working with REST framework and we need to add this to installed apps. Then I'm going to save that. Then the next step is we need to create a URLs for the app and register it in the project URLs. So what that just means is that we need to create a new URLs file inside our core application so that we can separate out our URLs to each app. I'm going to create a new file and call it urls.py. And inside this file, I'm going to say from django.urls import path. And then at the bottom, I'm just going to say URL patterns is equals to, and that to be equal to an empty list. So I'm just going to close it for now. Then after creating it in the application folder, I need to register that URL that I just created inside the projects folder to basically let Django know that we have a URL file inside our core app. Again, you can skip this step if you already have a Django application set up. So I'm just going to, after path, I'm going to import include. And right here, I'm just going to say path, and I'm going to leave the path empty. I'll type in include, and inside include, I'm going to put core.urls. So this is just going to enable, this is just going to tell Django to keep track of all the URL files inside our core application. So after doing that, the next step now is to return hello world from a view to test setup. So I'm just going to copy this. And now, by the way, I already have all of these. Sorry that I forgot to mention this. I already have this README file as well as the code to this project in the link in the description below. So it's take you to the GitHub repository where you can actually get this where you can actually get this README file, so you can follow along with me, so you don't always have to, type everything. So I just created this file so that it will serve as, a direction, so we don't always have to type everything, making the video shorter. So if you want to get this file as well as all the code to this project, there's going to be a link in the description which will take you to GitHub repository where you can get it. So I'm just going to copy this. Now, once I copy it, I'm going to head to my views.py file, and then I am going to paste all this here. So all we're simply saying is, okay, this is supposed to be REST. All we're simply saying is from REST framework.response, import response, and then from REST framework.decorators, import API view, so that we can basically render out a simple view to test our setup. Now, we then need to map this view to a URL. So what I will do is I'll go to my urls.py file inside my core application. And the first thing I'll say is from dot import views. And then what I'll just simply do here is I'm going to paste this. I'm going to call views.home and map it to the base URL. So the base URL is going to look, something like this: http://127.0.0.1 on port 8000. So this is what our base URL is going to, so our base URL, rather, HTTP, is going to map to this specific view. So let's just save it and run our server to test to see if it actually works. I'm going to go to my terminal and run python manage.py run server. Now, once the server is running, we're just going to ignore this for now, this 18 unapplied migrations. Let's just test to make sure that our server is running. Head to a new tab, and in the new tab, just visit localhost on port 8000. Now, once we do that, we see that we are greeted with this Django REST Framework interface, and it says hello world. So we are shown now that our implementation or our setup actually works because we returned hello world from this view. Now, the next step is we need to set up environment variables. Now, the reason why we need to set up environment variables is, because it's secure, first of all, and we're going to be making use of some special items which are going to get from Google. We're going to require a Google client ID and a Google client secret. And we can't just go to our settings app and just paste our secret key and our client ID like that. That wouldn't be safe. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up environment variables. Now, I like to use the couple library to set up environment variables, but if you have your own special library like using os.environ, you can use that. So it's just based on preference. So what we need to do is install decouple. So copy that command, head to your terminal. I'm just going to break out of the terminal and paste pip install python-decouple to install decouple for me. So after it has been installed, the next thing is we need to create an environment and a .env file, which is where we're going to store all our environment variables, and add debug and allowed host. So what I'm just going to do is I am going to create a new file called .env. So let me just do that. Now, this environment variable file is where we're going to store all our environment variables. So make sure you create that file in your base directory. That is where your manage.py file is and your SQLized database is. So once you do that, let's just copy this and paste it into the file. Now make sure that there is no space between the equal to and the actual value. Make sure everything is tight and no space between each item. Now you're going to notice that I set allowed host to star, comma. Now you know that this star is a wildcard, ensuring that any domain can serve our Django project. Now you might be questioning me why I put a comma here, but let's just proceed and you're going to see why I did that. Now it says import decouple and make use of environment variables. So I'm just going to go to my settings.py file, and at the top I am going to say from decouple import config. Now after importing config, we're just going to set our debug value to be what we have saved inside our environment variable file. So in order to make use of decouple, if you are using my method, what we're going to pass in is config. And after passing in config, or we're going to call config rather, which is this function which we imported from decouple. Now, after calling it, the first thing that we're going to pass in is the name of that environment variable that we have passed in, that we have stored in our env file. Now, because we call this debug, we're going to pass debug here. But if it was called like debug underscore value, it means I will also have to come here and say debug underscore value to make sure that whatever key you are passing in matches exactly what you have put in your environment variable file. Now, after doing that, we're also going to now do the exact same thing for allowed hosts. Now, you are going to see exactly why I put a comma. I'm just going to paste that here. So we're saying config of allowed hosts dot split. So actually, before I explain this, there's one more thing I forgot to explain here. So when you're using config, you can specify what data type is actually assigned to that specific variable. If I don't pass in cast equals bool here, what config is going to assume is it's grabbing a string value, and it will actually grab the value as true, just like this. But in order to ensure that we are grabbing a boolean value which is true, what we're just simply going to do is, this is meant to be uh, only the T is meant to be uppercase rather. So what we're just simply going to do is put a cast there. So cast is equals to bool, letting config know that okay, what we're trying to grab from our env file is actually a boolean value, not a string value. So it would automatically convert it to a boolean value. Now the next thing is allowed host. We said config of allowed host dot split. Now, when it goes to our config file, it is going to grab this star and it's going to see that there's a comma right after it. Now, because our allowed host is meant to be a list, it is going to first of all grab that environment variable as star and then comma. Now, since we're splitting with a comma, it's just going to assign it and put it in a list. So this is going to turn into a star and then a comma. So it is just going to automatically be turned into a list because our allowed host needs to be assigned to a list. So that is why we are putting a star and comma. So if, for example, you wanted to pass into websites, you can put like example.com, and then the next thing can be like mywebsite.com. So as long as you put a comma here, Python is just going to split it and turn it into a list. So that is exactly why I just did that. Now, the next thing, I'm just going to save this file. The next thing that we need to do is then create our user model. So we are done setting up the project. We can close our settings. We can close our environment variable, and even close our URLs and views. So the next thing is we need to create our user model. So it says in core, head to models.py file and add the following. So I'm just going to copy all of this code and explain what it does. So this is why I actually recommended you follow me with this README file so that you can, just copy and I explain it. So I'm just going to paste this here. So we need to import our base user manager. It seems I forgot to add that here. So I'm just going to import it now. And in order to import it, we're just going to say from django.contrib.auth.models import base user manager. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're just going to say from django.db import models. Sorry. So from django.db import models. Now, once we have done that, we are getting one more error. So we need to also import abstract user and permissions mixing. So to import those, we're just going to head to the top and also say from django.contrib.auth.models import base user manager, abstract user, as well as permissions mixing. So it's actually abstract base user, my bad. Now that we have imported all of that, let's just go through it. So what we have here is our registration choices. So this basically tells us, what way the user registered. So we have email and Google, and that is actually matched to our user object, and it is mapped to a field called registration method. So this basically just tells us what way the user registered by. So you can see the default is email because we're going to assume that all our users or most of our users are going to register with email and not Google. Then we have this custom user manager which inherits from base user manager. And we just have two methods inside this called create user, which will help us to create a new user object, which is, and it takes in email, the password, as well as the extra fields. So there's just some verification or validation here, rather, which checks to see if there is an email or not. Then we normalize the email, we create the user, sets the password, and then return the user. So we also have a method here which helps us create a new super user. So if we then come down to our user model, we see that our user model has fields of email, first name, last name, which, and all of these we can actually get from Google, as you are going to see when we proceed. Then we have registration method, which we had talked about. Then we have a staff, which tells us whether this user is a staff of our application, a super user, whether the user is an admin super user, whether the user's account is active, and the date that they joined. Then we just have a string method, which helps us return the self.user. So when you call a user object, this is what we actually see, the email. Instead of just saying, the object representation, we see the email which represents the object. Then we have objects is equals to our custom user manager, which we had created at the top here. Then we have our username field is equals to email. So because in this project, we want to be able to enable users to log in with their email instead of username, by setting the username field to be email. Then we have a simple method called get full name, which just returns the first name and the last name. So this would return something like John Doe. So this is supposed to be John. So John Doe, it would return something like this. So now that we have created our models and our user object, we just need to set the user model in settings.py file to the one we had just created. Now, this is a very crucial step because we need to do this before actually making our migrations, because if you then try to migrate and paste this in your settings.py file, Django is going to scream at you because it is going to use the default Django user model, which is it's going to use the default one, which comes from Django contrib.auth contrib sorry rib.auth.models import user. So what Django is going to do is it's going to use this default user object, which is already present, which it gives us by default. So what you want to do is you want to always make sure, in cases like this, you want to always make sure that when you're creating a user model, you want to, first of all, create the object, then set the auth user model to the one you have just created. If not, you are going to need to delete your database, that's your SQLite database, and make new migrations so that you can get rid of that error. I'm just going to copy this. Let me save my file, my models, copy it, go to my settings.py file, and we can actually paste this anywhere. So let me just paste it here. So auth user models is going to be core.user instead of custom user. This is going to be core.user. So what we're just telling Django is that we want our user model for this project to be the user class, which is present in our core application. So that is why we say core.user. So Django is going to come here, take note that, okay, this person has created a user class. So it's going to use that as our default user class. Now, the next thing is we just need to make migrations and migrate. So I'm going to first of all make migrations. I'll copy that, head to my terminal, and I'll paste this there. Oops, sorry. Let me copy this, and I'll paste this there just to make migrations. Now, after that has pasted, I'm then going to migrate so that all these changes can be applied to the database. So after all of these has been done, I will just clear my screen. Now, the next thing is that we need to create a super user. So because we're not actually going to be, building a login system or a register system for emails, because that would just go out of scope for this video. We're just going to create a super user. We're going to be using, we're going to create a super user, and we're going to be managing, the admin dashboard and our data using the super user. So you're going to see how exactly this will work. So I'm just going to copy that and paste it here. So Python manage.py, create a super user. And then I'm going to pass in an email of admin@gmail.com. You can see that it's requesting that we enter an email instead of username because we had set in our models that our username field should be email. And you notice that there isn't even a username field in our user object. So I'm going to pass that email in, and then the password. I'm just going to put the password, and then I'm going to put yes. So once that is done, it means our super user has been created. And it means that we can actually log into the admin dashboard using those credentials. Now, the next step is we need to install simple JWT and configure token endpoint. Now, if I scroll to the top, remember that I said users are going to be authenticating themselves to protected endpoints using the access token, which our backend has generated for them. So what we need to do is we need to, obviously create a way to be able to enable users retrieve, or get these access and refresh tokens. So when a user is able to log in with Google, that is when we have gone through this entire process and Google has sent back their data, we're then going to send them an access and refresh token to authenticate themselves. So we need to create a way to actually generate and send these access and refresh tokens. And we're going to be using simple JWT to do that. So the first step is it says we will be following the documentation to set up simple JWT here. So I'm just going to copy this link actually. So let me just copy it. So we're going to be following this step by step actually because we are we're going to be following the documentation because we need to set it up. So the first thing that we need to do is it says, these are the requirements. You need to have at least Python 3.9, Django 4.2, and DRF at least 3.14. So we're just going to install simple JWT from here by following this documentation. Pip install Django REST Framework that's simple JWT. So I will head to my terminal and paste that so that it can install simple JWT for me. So after the installation is done, we're just going to head back to the documentation. Now it says, cryptographic dependencies, but we don't need this because it's optional. So we're actually going to scroll down up onto project configuration. So it says, then your Django projects must be configured to use this library. In settings.py file, add REST framework underscore simple JWT dot authentication dot JWT authentication to the list of authentication classes. So what we're just going to do is let's just copy this right here. Go to our settings.py file, and I'm just going to scroll to the bottom. And in here, I'm going to paste this. So let's get rid of these dots and these dots. So I'm just going to explain what this does. So what we're telling Django here is that we want, among our default authentication classes, we want to add REST framework underscore simple JWT dot JWT authentication. We want to add that to our default authentication classes so that Django is aware that we're making use of simple JWT to authenticate users. Then it says also in your root urls.py file or any other URL config, include routes for simple JWTs, token obtain pair, and token refresh view. So what this is simply doing is that, what we need to do first of all is we need to copy this. Then I'm going to explain exactly what is happening. So just save your settings.py file and go to your urls.py file inside your core application, or you can do it in your settings if you want, but I would prefer to put it in my core application so that everything is separated, the authentication bit is separated. So let me just remove these dots, and I will actually copy the one we had created earlier. I will delete it and I will add it to this URL patterns list. So what exactly is happening here? Simple JWT has given us two endpoints by default, which we can actually make a request to. Now, these endpoints basically help us get the access token as well as a refresh token. So if we want to obtain an access and refresh token, all we simply have to do is hit these endpoints. And you can see that the endpoint is already mapped to a view which is inbuilt into the library. So we can actually take a look at this view, and you can see that this is everything that has been written. It's inheriting from token view base. And you can see basically that all the code has been written for us. And all we're just simply doing is importing those views from simple JWT and mapping them to endpoints in our application URLs. So now that we know that these people have given us, or the developers have given us these endpoints, we know we're rest assured that we can actually hit these endpoints. And we're going to test this in a short while. Let's just head back to the documentation. So it says you can also include a route for simple JWT, da da da. So we're not going to be using this. Although if you want to um, take a look at this documentation, or if you want more information, I would actually recommend that you read more on this documentation. So it now says if you wish to use localization and okay, so we're not also going to use this. If you wish to, okay, it says if you wish to use localization slash translation, simply add REST framework simple JWT to installed apps. So that is basically all we're going to be following in this documentation for now anyway. So what we need to do next, according to the README file, is we then need to test the endpoints to see if you can log in and refresh tokens. That is, we need to test these endpoints, which we need to test these endpoints, which simple JWT has given us to actually be sure if we can generate access and refresh tokens for users. So I'm going to save this, and after saving it, let's just run our server so we can python manage.py run server. We're going to run the server to test and see if you can actually hit these endpoints. So we're going to go to localhost port 8000 /API/token. So I am going to head to my browser, and in this tab, I am going to go to localhost port 8000 /API/token. Now, once we do that, we can see this endpoint which simple JWT has given us by default. So we can see it's called token obtain pair, and it says takes a set of user credentials and returns an access and refresh JSON web token pair to prove the authentication of those credentials. So you can also see that it says detail get method is not allowed. So we're seeing this error because when we loaded up the page, we actually made a get request to view these endpoints. So what we are going to do instead is, if you see, it says it only allows a post request. And if you look down, we can see that we have been given two fields called email and password. So we can actually test this out in this web interface instead of using an API tester like Postman, for example. So what we're going to do is we're just going to enter the super user credentials which we had created earlier, the one I created from the terminal. That is exactly what I'm going to enter here. Now, the moment I click post, let's see what we get back. So it says no active account found for the given credentials. So let me just go back to my settings, my models, to actually make sure. So is active is set to false, and that is the problem because by default I had already set is active is equals to false, and this is actually meant to be true. So forgive me because that is my fault. So after setting is active is equals to true, you might have actually gotten that error before. You might have also actually gotten the error with me. So after setting it to true, we're just going to run python manage.py make migrations. So we're running this command because we made a change to our user object. So after doing that, we're just going to run python manage.py migrate. Now, after running migrate, there is one more thing that we actually have to do. We need to update those two users which we had created. We need to set is active is equals to true because right now it's currently showing false. So what we can do is we can actually update this using the shell. I'm going to run python manage.py space shell. So this will automatically open the shell for us where we can run Django queries in the terminal right here. So I'm going to say users is equals to user dot objects dot all. Now, if you are not using the latest version of Django, this might not work for you. You might first of all have to do something like from let's say core.models import user. So you would have to do something like this first of all before calling users or objects or all. But in the updated Django version, we no longer have to import a module before using it. It just automatically gets imported when we run python manage.py shell. So I'm just going to call users. So we can see that we have two users, admin@gmail.com and admin2@gmail.com. So we're just going to set, we're going to write a simple for loop. So I'm going to say for user in users, and I'll put a comma and press tab. Then I'm going to say user.is_active is equals to true. Then I'll press enter, press tab again, and I'm going to say user.save. So once I run that and I type user, and so once I run that and like press enter, I am definitely sure that all the users which we had here are already set true. That is, their active status is already set to true. So for example, I can say user1 is equals to users of 0. That's to get the first user in this list. And then I can now say user1 dot is active. So once I run this, we can see that it says user1 dot is active is true. So that means that we have successfully been able to set the active status. So I'm just going to clear my screen and run my server once more. So once I run my server, we are then going to be able to most likely log in. So I'm going to come back here and refresh. Let me just refresh this. And once I refresh it, I'm going to put the username and password there, and I'm going to click post. Now, once I click post, I want you to notice what we get. You see that the error is now gone, and it says it gives us a refresh and an access token. So using this token, we can actually make a request to protected routes on a client can actually make requests to protected routes on our endpoint. So I'm sure you already have an idea of how JWT access and refresh tokens actually work. So I'm not going to go too much into the explanation of how they work, but the main idea is that when a user wants to make a request to a protected route, or when a client wants to make a request to a protected route on our API, they need to pass this access token. Now we can actually set how long this access token lasts for. We can set it to minutes, days, hours, months, if you want. But the moment it expires, we are then going to need to generate a new access token using the refresh token, which we have been provided here. And that is why we have this token refresh endpoint, which has been given to us by simple JWT. So I will just copy this endpoint actually. Okay, it's actually token /refresh. So in order to test if that second endpoint works, what I'm going to do is I am going to copy this. What I will do is I'm going to copy this refresh token right here. And I'm just going to copy it like that. And once I've copied it, I will go to /refresh. Now, once I do that, you can see that we have a field to paste the refresh token. So I will just paste it. And once I click post, you can see that we get a new access token. So what that means is that the moment an access token expires, we can generate a new access token using the refresh token. Now, that is all we're going to talk about for this section of the course, which is simple JWT. So there's a whole lot more, there's a lot more things that you can do using access, there's a lot more configurations, that you can perform for your Django access and for your access and refresh tokens. And if you actually want to know more, you can click this video right here, or you can just, you can copy the link and to take you to a YouTube video where I actually explained in detail how access and refresh tokens work. There's actually a lot more configuration that you can do. For example, one of them that you can do is that if you notice, we had used a previous access and we had used a previous refresh token to generate this access token. But the problem is that we can also use that refresh token to generate a new access token. So this is bad because we only want refresh tokens to be able to we only want refresh tokens to be used once and then they become blacklisted. So there's a whole lot more configuration that can be done. So if you want to learn more about this, please visit either the JWT documentation, which we have opened here, or you can just watch this video, which I created, and it breaks down everything in great detail. So you have full understanding of how access and refresh tokens work. Now we're going to move on to the next step, which is creating a new project on Google. Now, because we are going to be authenticating users with Google, obviously, we need to create a new application in Google, and we're going to need to get some important credentials called the access and refresh token. So to proceed, it says head to Google Cloud Console. So I'm just going to copy this link. Now, this is going to be kind of a lengthy process, but we are going to walk through it together. So just visit console.cloud.google.com in a new tab in your browser. So now that we have already loaded, our console application, the next step which we are going to take is we need to click on the new project tab. We need to click on the project tab and select new project. So we can do that by clicking this icon here, and we click new project. So what we're just simply doing is we're trying to create a new project on Google. Then it says give your project a name and click create. I'm just going to give it a name of DRF auth. For example, I'll call it DRF auth, and then I'm going to click create. So once I click create, we're going to go back, and it says give your project a name and click create. Then it says wait for your project to get created. So we can see that our project now has been created called DRF auth. Now the next step is we're going to move to step 5, which is set up OAuth consent screen. So it says this is where we set up what a user sees when they click sign in with Google. We need to set this up before we get OAuth credentials. Now, those OAuth credentials are actually the client ID and client secret, which we are going to get from Google. And we need these details in order to actually authenticate and validate all of these, actions when the user sends a token, when we receive the token and send this back to Google. We need to authenticate and verify all of those actions. This is why we need to do this. Oh, there's a mistake in my numbering here. So what we're going to do next is select the project after it has been created. So I'm going to select this project, right? And we can see the project is called DRF auth. So this is our dashboard and what it looks like. Then the next thing is it says expand the navigation menu on the left and select APIs and services or consent screen. So that is this navigation menu here. So if it isn't already expanded, just click it. Then it says select APIs and services and then OAuth consent screen. So once we select that, the next step is it says under overview, go through with the process. So under overview, I'm just going to click get started. So I'm going to give my app a name. I'm going to call it DRF auth app or something like that. So this is our app information. Then for the support email, this is required. You do have to add the support email. And for that, just add the current Google account, which is tied to this project. Now, the next thing is we need to click audience. Now, your audience, the first one is internal. It says only available to users within your organization. But what we're going to do is actually click external because we want this application to be available to everybody in the world. That is, we want anybody to be able to sign into our application using their Google account, which is why we click external. It says available to any test user with a Google account. Your app will start in testing mode and will only be available to users you add to list of test users. So we don't have to worry about that for now. And just click next. Now, contact information, we can put any email address we want there, but I'm just going to put the exact same email which is mapped to my account. And I'll click next. And I'm going to click I agree to the Google API Services User Data Policy. So you can decide to read that if you want. But I'll just click continue and then click create. So once I create that, let's just head back to the README file. Now, the next thing is it says under branding, which is this next item here. It says fill in app name and select user support email. Upload a logo optional. So we already have the app name here, which we had already created before, DRF auth app, and we have the support email, which has been selected by default. Then it says we need to add the app logo. Now, this is optional, I believe, which I had added here. So you can either choose to add a logo if you want to or not. So for now, I will just add like a test image or something. Let me just add this logo, and then I'm going to, leave that like that, leave it like that. Then the next step is optionally add app domains. So if you have a domain, for example, if you have a homepage, a website already running, and you want to link to the homepage, you can just put it there. If you have a privacy policy page or a link, you can put it there, as well as TOS, which is terms of service. But we're just going to ignore that for now. And the next step is, it says we will leave authorized domains for now. So we're just going to skip this for now, and we might come back to it later, but we don't need to set that up currently. And the next thing is, it says fill in a developer contact info. Now you can choose to add as many emails as you want, for example, but I'm just going to add only the email which is tied to my account. So after doing that, the next step is to click save and continue. So I'm just going to click save. So that would automatically save all of these details to the branding of this current application. So now it says branding changes saved. Now the next step is it says we need to add scopes for the information we want to access from the Google account. Remember that I said when we send that token to Google, we're requesting the user data. So what we need to do is we need to actually select the scopes. That is what kind of data that our application can collect for us on our behalf from Google accounts. So that's exactly what this means. When we send the token, Google is going to send back the user data, which we had specified that we want to access in scopes. So let me just scroll back down to where we are. So it says click data access. So I'm going to click data access. Then the next step was to click add or remove scopes. So I'm going to click add or remove scopes. Now the next thing is, it says select the first two options. These will give us access to information like the user's email, name, profile photo, and so on. So I'm going to click the first one as well as the second one. So you can see that the user facing description is see your personal Google account email address, and it says see your personal info, including any personal info you've made publicly available. So that would mean we can get, the profile of the user. So that's the first name, last name, profile image, and then we can get their email also. So those are all we basically need to, add. So just click update, and that will update. After clicking update, it now says click save and continue. I'm just going to click, you can see they've been added here. I'm just going to click save so that all of those changes that we've made can be saved. Now the next step is, the summary is that we need to make sure that all the info are correct and go back to the dashboard. That is, we need to make sure that all we have done so far is, correct, and we'll follow the proper steps before we can proceed. So after doing that, it says go back to the dashboard. So I'm just going to, go back and click this app so that we get taken to dashboard. Let me click this Google Cloud, and you can see that we are in the dashboard. I'm going to click that app again. Sorry. I'm going to click dashboard so that we can go to the dashboard of this application. Now it says the next step is to create credentials. That is the client ID and client secrets, which we are going to require when we are making a request to Google. So it says we are going to make use of these credentials in our Django project. It says click client credentials in the side nav. Then the next step is click create credentials and OAuth client ID. So I'm just going to go to the side nav, click API and services, and then click credentials. Now, after clicking credentials, it's the next thing is to click create credentials and OAuth client ID. I'm going to go over here and click this create credentials and select OAuth client ID, which is the second option. Now, the next step is, it says application type should be web application. So once it has loaded, give it an application type of web application. Then give it a name. So let's just name it DRF auth credentials. Now, after doing that, the next thing is, it says, next, we will fill authorized JavaScript origins. So if we scroll down, we can see that we have something called authorized JavaScript origins. And if we hover over it, it says the HTTP origins that that hosts your web application. This value can't contain wildcards or path. If you use a port other than 80, you must specify it, for example, https example dot da da da. So what this essentially means is that the HTTP origins, the websites which can host your web application. So because we are going to be making a request to our backend from a front end, what we are going to do is we're actually going to pass in a front end URL. And obviously, we know that that front end URL is where all our front end files are going to be. So like the HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So that is why we need to add authorized JavaScript origins, because we're essentially telling Google that, okay, we are going to be executing some JavaScript, which is going to make a request to you on this specific URL, which we are going to add. That is why we need to let Google know. So it's like a security mechanism to ensure that nobody is just making a request to our Google application anyhow. So we're telling Google essentially to only allow requests to come in from certain domains. So I'm just going to copy this first domain, and I'm going to explain exactly why I am using this domain. Then I'll copy the second one and I'll paste it. So if you are on React, for example, if you are running React or any framework, any front-end framework, I would encourage that you paste the URL, the base URL which that framework gives you. I'm not sure what base URL React gives you, but you can just paste it right here. Make sure you put 127.0.0.1 on the port which it uses, and then localhost on the port which it uses. Now, the reason why I'm using 5500 is because I am actually going to be creating a HTML file, right, somewhere here, and I am going to be running that file using Live Server. So Live Server is an extension that VS Code gives us by default. So for example, if I come here and create a new file and call it test.html, and I decide to, write some default HTML code, what I can actually do is click Go Live, and it will serve like a server, which will always serve this HTML file. So the moment I click Go Live, you'll notice that this web page was opened in my Firefox. And anytime I make a change, like for example, let's say I create a paragraph tag now, and I say hello world. The moment I save it and go back to the web page, you can see that it's automatically refreshed by itself and rendered out hello world. So I'm going to be using Live Server to serve this um, simple HTML file. And if you want to get that extension, just go to the extensions tab and search Live Server. So once you search Live Server, it's usually going to be the first item that shows up right here. So this is exactly what the extension looks like, Live Server. So I would like you to make use of it if you're using Visual Studio Code. So what I would recommend is that in order to actually make this work, you will need to host your project on some kind of server. You can't just write a HTML file and link it to that HTML file, because that might not work. It needs like a server like localhost, but 500 or whatever you're using. So if you're using a front-end framework, then just paste the URL into authorized JavaScript origins. But if you are using a HTML and an HTML file, I would recommend that you make use of Live Server, right? So that you can so that you can develop it and paste the URL, which is this HTTP 127.0.0.1 5500. So you can see that Live Server is by default on 5500. So that is why I did that. So the next thing that we're going to do is, okay, let me just delete this first of all. Delete. So the next thing that we're going to do, according to the README file, is that we need to make sure we add exactly those URLs. So it doesn't have to exactly be these URLs actually. All it has to be is, the URL to perhaps the base URL that your framework has given you by default, for example. If it was Django now, if I was building this with Django, I would have put port 8000, but I am not. Then it says click create and then download created credentials. I'm just going to scroll down. We don't need to worry about this. Click create. Now, once that has created, you can see that we have the client ID and client secret here. But I'm just going to, like download download this so that I can access it later, so that I don't always have to have this open. So the next thing is I'll just click OK. Now my client's credentials, my client's secret and client ID have been created. Now the next step is, after downloading the client ID and secret, it says we need to set up Google OAuth in DRF. That is, we need to set up Google OAuth in our Django REST Framework application or in our Django application. So the next step says add client ID and secrets to env file and settings.py file. So I will just copy these, open my env file, and I will come down to paste this. So my Google OAuth client ID is going to be equals to the client ID. And I can actually get those from the file which I had just downloaded. So I am going to open that file in my VS Code. Now, once I open that file, let me just format it. I'm going to click Format Document. So I can see my client ID here. So I will just copy this client ID, go to my env file, and I will paste it here. And I'll do the exact same thing with my client secret, which is right here. I'll just copy it, and then I will paste it here and save it. Now notice that we can see the JavaScript origins are exactly what we had, set. So just do that, and we can close that file. So after adding those credentials to our env file, the next thing we need to do is we need to add them in our settings.py file also. So copy that and go to your settings file. And then we're going to say Google OAuth client ID is equal to config of Google OAuth client ID. So we're trying to grab these values from our env file by calling the config and passing in the key, which is assigned to the value. So I'm just going to do that and save it. So now we have our client ID and secrets saved and configured within our application. Now the next step is we need to install the Google Authentication library. Now this is a library that will be helping us, actually perform most of the operations which we are going to do. So it is going to help us actually perform the verification or validation of that token on the back end. So when we receive that token, we're going to make use of that library to send that token to Google. And as a response, Google is going to send back the user data. So this is why we need to make use of this library here. So I'm just going to copy it, head to my terminal, break out of it. Let me clear it first of all, and paste that command. So it's just help us install Google Auth, which is a library, and we can actually, check. You can actually open it. So for example, let me just go to my browser. I'll create a new tab and say Google-Auth PyP or PyP. So this is just going to help us open the documentation. And once you click it, it will take you to this documentation where you can, read more about it. So I believe there is also a standard documentation for it, which is here. So read the docs.io. So I would actually recommend to, read through this documentation if you want to know more about it. I'll leave a link to it in the description. So after it has finished installing, the next step is we need to head to our views.py and import all of these. So I will just copy this and import it, and then we can explain exactly what each line that we're importing will help us do. Yeah, so I'll go to my views.py file, and let me just replace all of this. Okay, let me actually paste that here. So the reason why I am seeing this error is because my VS Code has opened a different virtual environment called Albanian Tourism App, but this project is actually called DRF Auth, DRF Google Auth. So I'm just going to select it. And once I select it, the error should disappear soon. As you can see, it has disappeared. That is because that library is installed in this DRF Google Auth virtual environment. So what exactly do we have here? We have from REST Framework the response, import response, and API view as usual, so that we can return some response back to the client, as well as API view, which helps us dictate what kind of request that an endpoint, what kind of request method that an endpoint can receive. Let me just remove this line because it's repeated. Now the next thing is settings. So we're importing settings so we can access. If I open my settings, we're importing it in our views.py file so that we can access our OAuth client ID because we had saved it in the settings. Now we're going to, from google.auth.transport, we're going to import request as Google request. So we're importing this request from the Google library, from the Google Auth library, which we had just installed, and you are going to see how we're going to use it. And we're also saying from google.org to import ID token. Now we're going to make use of this ID token in order to actually, grab the token from the client, which the client is going to send, and then we're going to send that token to Google to verify if it actually works. Then from .models, instead of custom user, this is supposed to be called user. So from .models, import user. We're just importing that user model which we created earlier. Then as usual, from REST framework, import status. Then from REST framework, the simple jwt.tokens, import refresh token. Now remember that I had said the moment a user object has either been gotten or created, we're going to return um, an access and a refresh token. So it is this class right here that is going to help us generate a new access and refresh token so that we can send as a response. So let me just remove this line because it's repeated. So now that we've gone through all the inputs, let's see what we need to do in the next step. Now, the next step is we need to create a Google Auth view. So in our views.py, I'm just going to copy this and I will actually paste this on the top here. So we're creating a new view called Google Auth, and it's going to handle everything about Google Authentication. So it's going to enable users to be able to either sign in or register. So just create the view. It's an API view of post request, so it will only accept post requests. Now the next step is we need to first extract the token from the request body. So let's just copy this and I will explain exactly what that means. Let me indent this properly. So the first line that we have is token is equals to request.data.get token. So because this view is going to be expecting a post request and it is going to be expecting that a user sends that token, we're trying to grab the token by saying request.data.get token. Now, if no token is found, it will automatically resolve to none. That is why we're saying if not token here. That is, if no token was gotten, that is, if it is none that has been assigned to this variable. So we're going to return a response. And the response is a dictionary saying, with an error message of token not provided, with a status of false, and the status code or the response status code which are returning is HTTP 400 bad request because we were expecting that you send a token but you didn't send it. Now remember again that that token is being sent here. At this point, our front-end application would have sent the token. Now, please keep in mind that, I had said earlier that I am actually going to um, we are going to be writing out a simple HTML, CSS, and JavaScript front end, which will then simulate, like a full client server interaction. So for now, we're just going to be working on the back end, but after this section, we're going to move to working on the front end. So you're going to see how everything connects together. So after doing that, after getting the token, the next thing that we're then going to do is we're going to wrap everything in a try except block to handle invalid tokens. I'm just going to copy this and I am going to paste this here. So you are going to see how exactly this will work. I'm going to explain it, but just follow with me. So we're going to create a try and except block. Now, inside this try and except block, what we're going to do inside the try block is we are going to use this token to try and, we're going to try to verify this token by sending it to Google, which is what we are doing here. So inside the try block, we're going to try to get that token and send this to Google. So if an error occurs, that is, if Google is not able to validate that this token is actually valid, and this except block is going to this except block is going to fire and then it's going to return an error of invalid token with a status of false and the status is going to be HTTP 400 bad request. So we're essentially going to tell the clients that you have sent an invalid token. Now you might be wondering why I passed in a value error here. So we are going to notice why we are only trying to catch a value error exception. So let us proceed. Now if I scroll down up until where we are, The next step now is we need to verify the token using Google's ID token or verify, method. So this is exactly why we had imported this ID token uh, class from Google.OAuth too. So I'm just going to copy this and explain exactly what we are doing. So head back to your views, and inside the try block, we are going to paste that line of code that we just copied. So what exactly are we doing here? We said ID info is equals to ID token dot verify or to token. So we're trying to verify that this token is actually valid, right? So the first thing that we're going to pass into this method is token. Then the next thing that we're passing in is Google requests dot request, which we had imported here from Google.auth transport import request. We're trying to make a request to Google using this class which we had imported from the top. Then the next thing is we need to pass in the client ID. Now, this is exactly why we had imported settings by saying settings.google auth client ID. And that is why we had added it in the settings.py file. So we are doing this because we want to actually verify that this token which the user sent was created under our own client ID, was created using our client ID. Because when a user tries to log into our application or sign up to our application using Google, we are creating that whole Google sign-in session using our own client ID, which we have created in Google. That is which we created in, if I go back to there, which we created here. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to verify that this token, which is being sent to this view, was actually created using our own client ID. The next step is that we need to extract the user information from the Google response. Now, if we observe this line of code right here, I had already explained earlier that what we're doing is we're trying to verify if that token is actually valid. Now, what actually happens also is that the moment Google has been able to verify that, okay, this token is actually valid, it then returns back to us the user data. Now, remember that when we were trying to create our application and set up auth consent screen, we went to data access and selected scopes. Now for the scopes, we had selected that we want to be able to get the user profile and user details. And those details include the first name, the last name, the email, and the profile picture. So what we can actually do is let's just head back to the README file so we can visualize it. Remember that I had explained when we send the token to Google, Google verifies that token. And once that's been verified, it sends back the user data. Now, that data, like I had explained, is the email, first name, last name, and profile picture. So let me just scroll down. Now, the next step is it says extract the user information from Google response. So let me just copy this and I will explain exactly what is happening. So copy it and paste it right under this ID info. So once we do this, ID info is equals to ID token dot verify OAuth2 token, and Google is able to verify that okay, this token is valid. It's then going to return back to us all of this data. It's going to return the email, it's going to return the first name, and the key is going to be given name. The last name is going to be family name, which is the key, and then the profile picture is just going to be profile. And this is actually a profile picture URL that gets sent to us. So let me just actually even print out the ID info so that we are going to have a visual of it when we are testing. So the reason why we're able to do this is because Google is going to respond to us, using a JSON response, but it gets converted into a Python dictionary by default. Now, if you look at this line right here, we're saying email is equals to ID info of email. So we're trying to grab the email from the response, which was sent as a dictionary back to ID info. We're trying to grab the email using the key of email. Then we're doing the exact same thing we're doing the exact same thing for the first name, last name, profile pic URL. Now we're using their keys. So when we print this out, you are actually going to see how it look like. I want you to notice something. For the other ones, I did ID info.get, ID info.get, but for the beginning, I didn't add .get. Now, what happens when this line of code tries to access the email from the response which Google sent, and that email isn't present there, and this key isn't present there? That would mean that there was an error validating or verifying that this token actually exists. Because in the response, we're always sure that we should receive
the email, giving name, family name, and picture. But if for any reason we don't receive any of this data, then we are sure that there has been an error which has occurred when Google tried verifying the token. So this line right here is going to throw an error known as value error. So a value error occurs when you try to access a value from a dictionary with a key that does not exist in that dictionary. So at this point, if we try to access info, ID info of email, and email is not a key in the response which was returned, then this line is going to throw a value error exception, and we are catching that exception inside this excepts block. So once we catch it, it means that the token could not be verified, and the error is going to be invalid token, status of false, and the status response code is going to be 400 bad request, meaning that the client, whether it's a website or a mobile app, sent the wrong token to this endpoint. So after doing that, the next step now is to check if a user already exists with this email. If not, create a new one. If yes, confirm they registered with Google. So I'm just going to copy all of this, and I'm going to explain exactly what is happening here. So just follow with me step by step. So I'm going to paste that right here, and then I am going to zoom in. So let's rename this to user instead of custom user. Now, the first line right here, we have user, created is equals to user.objects.get or create. Now, you might be wondering, if you don't already know what this line does, you might be wondering why we have two variables equals to get or create equals to this query, which is user.objects.get or create. Now, what it means is that what get or create does is that it either gets an object that already exists, but if it does not exist, it is going to create it. So in here, we said user.objects.get or create email is equals to email. So I'm basically telling Django, go through the database and get the object or get the data or get the user whose email is equals to the email that we got from Google. But if a user with that email does not exist, then I want you to go ahead and create that user. Now, what then happens is that get or create returns two items. The first item that it returns is the object, that is the object that was either just created or retrieved from the database. Then the second item it returns is a Boolean value. And this Boolean value is either true or false. It's going to be true if the object was created, but that is using the or create, and created is going to be false if the object was retrieved from the database. So that is what basically get or create does. It's either creates the object and returns true as well as the object itself, or it retrieves the object and returns the object and false. So the next thing that we're now doing is we're checking if created. That is, if a new user was just created using the email we got from Google, then the next thing we want to do is we want to say user.set unusable password. So we're saying set unusable password because this user isn't going to have any password that ties their account to, that ties their credentials to our backend. That is because they are logging in with Google. So there is no way and there's no place that they are going to type in a password. The only way a user would log in with a password is if they are registering with their email and their password. But since we are registering their account uh, with Google, it means that we're just going to set unusable password. That is, the user does not have any password. So the only way we'll be able to authenticate them is by using this token, which we get from Google. So if created basically means, okay, if we're just creating this user newly, then set unusable password. Then we're going to set the first name of the user, set the last name, and then we're going to set the registration method to Google. If you remember from the models, the registration method has two choices, either email or by Google. So you can see right here, the choices are email and Google. So we're setting the registration method to Google, and then we are saving that user in the database. Now, if you remember, this is all part of the process of when we get the user data back, we are going to process data saved to DB if that user object did not exist. Now, the next step is in this else block. What this else block means is that, so if created, that is, if true, if this object was created, then perform this. Or else, that is, if the object was not created, then what do we want to do? We want to check if the registration method of the user is equals to Google. So what this means is that if the user was not created, then obviously it means that this user already existed in our database. So we want to check if the user's registration method is equals to Google or if it is not equals to Google. This is very important because we only want users who registered with Google to be able to log in only with Google. And we want users who registered with email to only be able to log in with email so that there is no crossover between like for example, if a user who signed up with Google then tries to log in with email and password, they won't be able to do that because obviously we had said user.set unusable password. So this is going to help us prevent users who sign up with Google from trying to sign in using email. They can only sign in with Google since they signed up with Google. So we're checking if the user registration method is not equals to Google. At least if the user didn't register with Google, then we're just going to return a response. And the error is going to be user needs to sign in through email because obviously the other method is going to be email. Then the status here is false. Then we're returning a status of forbidden. Status is HTTP underscore 403 underscore forbidden, meaning that, okay, we know that this email is valid. We know that this user exists, but this user cannot log in to our website or to our platform using those credentials because they need to using their Google accounts because they need to sign in with email. So that is basically what all of this does. So if you have any questions so far, please don't hesitate to leave a question in the comment section and I will be happy to reply you. So we're going to move on to the next step right now. And the next step says generate JWT tokens for the authenticated user. So I'm just going to copy this first of all, and then we're going to look at how this works and what it means. I'm just going to copy that and paste this here. So I will indent this properly to get rid of these errors, and I will put a comma here to get rid of the error. So let's explain what exactly is going on here. Now let me just head back to the README file first of all and go to the top. Now remember that I said when we send that token to Google to request the data, Google sends back the user data if the token is valid. And then we are going to process that data, save to DB, and create normal JWT for authentication. Now, remember that I said when a user wants to access a protected route, they have to provide their access and their access token rather. So what that now means is that once we have been able to verify that user data actually exists from Google by grabbing it, once we're able to verify that the token is valid and we receive the data from Google, what we're then going to do is either save it or retrieve that user from the database and then generate a new JWT token pair. That is the access and refresh token, and we're going to return that token back to the client. So if the client ever wants to make a request to, for example, maybe a protected route, it can just use that access token which had been gotten from a login, which had been gotten from the backend. So you can now see how the whole process forms a loop and you can see how everything works. So let me just scroll down and look at what we are doing here. So we're saying refresh is equals to refresh token dot for user, and we're passing in user. So what we're just simply doing here is we're trying to generate a new access and refresh token for the current user, which has either been created or has just been retrieved. So that is exactly what we are doing here by saying refresh token dot for user, and then we're passing user into this parenthesis here. And after doing that, we're just trying to return a response. We're trying to return a response, and in the response, we have a key called tokens. Now, tokens basically houses two other items called access and refresh. So access right here is just the access token which has been generated for us from here, and the refresh token is just going to be, we're just going to pass in refresh right from this line. So this is how we're able to grab the access and refresh token. We can actually view it. So if I hover over it and click it, it's meant to open. So you can see this is inbuilt into simple JWT. So you can see this is access token. It returns a new access token. So that is basically what we're going to do here. Generate a new access and refresh token then pass them into the response status of true, and then we're going to set the response status to be HTTP 200 OK. And then we're going to return all of this as a response back to the client. So the client is then going to receive the access and refresh token and probably store it in like, like session storage, local storage, or whatever local storage system that you have, whether it's a mobile app or a front end framework like React or Vue or whatever. So the next thing that we're just going to do is we're going to save it. So for now, I believe this is all the code that we actually need to write on the backend. So okay, there's just one more thing that we need to do. Okay, we don't actually need this line, so we can just leave it there for now. So if we head back to the README file, it now says that this is what our full Google Auth view should look like. So if your view does not look like this, then you should make sure that it looks, like this so that we can avoid any errors. So this is all we need to do on the back end. So in order to proceed, we are then going to start with the front-end implementation. Now we have already done everything that we need to do on the Django side. That is on the Django REST framework side. That is, we started from step 4, where the front end sends the token. We send that token to Google to request the user data. Google sends back the data, and then we return the response. But we need to actually now work on, the front end aspects, which is step 1 to 2 to 3. So we need to work on these first 3 steps because we have already handled the last 4 steps on the back end. Now let's scroll down here. I actually did also create a guide which we are going to be following. Now I had explained earlier that going into this tutorial, I am going to be implementing the front end using HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript. So that's just normal JavaScript. And I have already created this step-by-step guide which we are going to be following. And as usual, I will be explaining it. So if you are a mainly a backend developer, I would encourage you to actually just follow through this step also so that you can see how your implementation will actually work on the front end side. So it gives you better understanding. So although if you want to stop, you can just stop there, but I don't really see how you would be able to test it. So let's proceed. So the next step says, this is the next part, Google OAuth front-end implementation. It says this guide walks you through creating a simple HTML front-end that integrates with your Django REST Framework API for Google OAuth authentication. Now, the next step is we need to create basic HTML structure. And it says create an HTML file, e.g. index.html with the basic folder structure. So let me just, with the basic structure, so let me just copy that. Then we can create this file in any location. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be within the Django application. But just for the purpose of keeping everything in one place, let me create the HTML file inside the base directory where I have my manage.py file. I'm going to call it index.html. Now, what exactly am I going to do? I will just copy all of this. So it says create an HTML file with the basic structure. Let me just copy this and paste it in there. So this is the basic structure of my index.html file. Now notice that there is one more thing that we're going to do. If you see down here, if you had already installed live server, then you're going to see the icon here. So I'm just going to click to run live server. So at this point, you can then decide to, at this point, if you are watching this tutorial with the aim of using a front-end framework, you can search up the alternatives to help get that token from Google actually. So for example, I believe if you're using React, you can come over to, this library right here, which is called React OAuth to Google. So this library is going to help you. Obtain the token from Google. So once the user clicks continue as whatever it is or sign in with whichever email it is, it will then make that request to Google, and Google is going to send back the access, and Google is going to send back the token which you are then going to send to the backend API. So I would recommend using a library like this. So if you are using another framework like Vue or Angular, I'm sure there are alternatives out there. So all you need to do on the front end is to just write some code to get the token from Google. And you don't actually even need to make use of a library right here. You can just do it using HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript, which I'm going to be showing you now. So the next step is, after creating the basic HTML structure, we need to add the Google sign-in script. So it says include the Google sign-in JavaScript library in the head section. So I'm just going to copy this script, go to the head section before the closing, and I'll paste it there. So what we're simply doing here is we're trying to import this Google, as README said, we're trying to include the Google sign-in JavaScript library. So this is a library that has been written by Google, and it's in the cloud somewhere, it's online. We're just simply calling it using the link so that it will be available within our HTML file. Then the next step is to add CSS styling. Add styling to make the page look professional. Place this in the head section. So you can again skip this step if you're not really interested in styling, but I had just created all of this so that the page doesn't look bad. I'm going to come down, and in the head tag, I will paste all of this style and I'll save it. Now let's actually check how it looks like. So if I come here, you can see that this is how the web page now looks like, because we had been able to add that style. So it changed the way it looked a bit. So if I head back to the README, step 4 says add HTML elements for Google sign-in. Then it says update the body content to include containers for the Google sign-in button and status message. So just copy this div, and within the body, so let's just see where it is. So there is a new div called card which we created. So this is right here. So I'm just going to replace everything inside card with this entire expression which I've just copied. So I will do that and paste it. Let me just make sure everything is indented properly. Do that, then do this. Okay. Now once I save this and head back to the page, we can now see there is some text here that says by signing in you agree to use you agree to use our terms of service and privacy policy. So basically we're just adding extra content. But let's look at this HTML structure first of all. So we have this button called Google sign in div, and it has a class of Google button. Now this has not been rendered out yet because we have not initialized the Google login client into our HTML file using JavaScript, and we're going to be doing that very, very soon. And then the next thing is we have some loading text that says signing in. So by default, the display is none. So the moment we try to sign in, it's going to change to signing in. Then we have another div which is going to help us display an error if any error was gotten. Then we have a success div. So by default, these are also false. Then we have the token display. So this div is basically going to help us display the response that we get back from our endpoint. So if we scroll down, we can see that our endpoint returns the tokens, the access and refresh tokens, as well as the status. So this specific div is going to help us display it. And we're going to add the content to this div using JavaScript, which we're going to write. And this is just some paragraph tags to show some text. By signing in, you agree to our terms of service and privacy policy. Now the next step is add JavaScript configuration. Add the JavaScript code before the closing body tag. So this is 5.1. It says define API configuration and DOM elements. So the step says define your API endpoints and get references to DOM elements. So what we're simply doing is, okay, let's just copy this. Now after copying it, it says we need to place this before the closing body tag. So let's just do this, and I will explain exactly what this line does, or what this line does. So let me indent this properly. Oops. Let me indent this properly. So what we have done first of all is we've created a constant variable. As you can see, all of them are constants. We've created a constant variable called API, and it just maps to the API endpoint. So since our Django project is going to be running on localhost port 8000, let's just actually run our server. So since our Django project is going to be running on localhost port 8000, we're just going to put that URL here and set it to API. Then the loading element, const loading element, is going to be documents or get elements by ID of loading. So what we're simply just doing is we're trying to manipulate the DOM we're trying to get an element whose ID is loading. That's why we're using documents to get elements by ID. And we can see that this is the div whose ID is loading. We're trying to get that div. We're also trying to do the same for error, success, and token display. So basically, we're able to get all these divs right here by using their IDs, because we are going to then manipulate the contents that exist within them. Let's make sure our server is running. So we are getting an error saying the request library is not installed from is not installed is not installed from. Please install the request package to use request transport. So we are getting an error which we need to resolve. So the reason why we are getting that error is because we needed to actually install the request library. As you can see, it says import error. The request library is not installed from. So it says, please install the request package to use the request transport. What it's basically telling us is that the error was coming from this line right here. And in order to actually make use of requests from auth.transport, we needed to import or install the request library first. Let's just clear the screen and run our server. So we can see now that the error is gone and our server is running successfully. So let's head back to the README file to see what the next step is. So the next step is, it says create the callback function. So the function handles the response from Google after successful authentication. So what that basically means is that after the user has successfully logged in, that is, after the user has successfully been able to log in from Google, what should happen next? We are then going to create a callback function, which is going to help us grab the token from the request which Google has, from the data which Google has sent back, and then send it to our endpoint. Let's just scroll down to where that happens. And then I'm going to create this function. So let me just copy this, and we're going to explain what all of this does. Just copy that and follow along with me. So inside the script tag, I will then go down. Let me just create space here and paste all of this. Okay. Seems I pasted the wrong one. Let's copy that again, paste. So after doing this, I would just like to indent all of this properly so it looks nice. Okay. So now we have a function called handle callback response. And the first thing that we're doing is we're trying to console or log that response to the console. So what that means is that when we come to the browser and we inspect, it would mean that we'll be able to see the data that Google has sent us when we head to the console section. That is why we're saying console.log. Now, the next thing that we need to do is we need to show the loading state. So we're saying show loading state, and then we're saying the loading elements of style.display is equals to block, error.style.display is equals to none, successful.style.display is equals to none. So basically, we're setting all the styles first of all equals to none, but we're setting the loading elements to be block. The display is going to be block. So at first, the loading element is none, but we're then setting it to block so that the moment we receive a response from Google, we're going to show the user that, okay, it is currently loading, that is, it's trying to process the request. And the next thing is we're trying to then prepare the form data. So we're creating a new form here by saying const form data is equals to new form data. And then we're trying to append the token. We're saying form.append token. So the form is going to append a new value that has the key of token, and the value is going to be response.credential. Now notice that we're getting that response from here because Google is going to send us a response. So we're grabbing that response, and from the response object, we're grabbing a key called credential. Now this credential is actually the token that Google is going to send back to us. So what we are then going to do is we are then going to send this token to our API. So we're going to say API/Google login. Now, I don't believe we have created a URL for this view. So let us go ahead and actually create a URL for that view. So I'm going to now come down here and I'll say path. And in here, I'm going to put Google, let's just leave it as Google_login. And this is going to be views dot Google OAuth, if I am not wrong. So it's going to be called views.google auth. We're just going to save that. Now, after saving it, we're then going to make a post request using fetch to our API port slash Google underscore login, which is the URL that I just created here. Now we're sending a post request and the body is going to be form data. Now, because the key here is token, now remember that in the view, we can now grab that token using the key, which is token. So we can say token is equals to request or data dot get token. Now, after sending that, we're then using the dot then. So we're checking to see if the response is not okay. That is, if there was an error. We're going to throw a new error and say login field, please try again. But if the response was okay, that is, if no error occurred, we're going to return response.json. So we're going to return, we're going to convert it to JSON, the response that we get. So that response is going to come from here once we have returned the response from our endpoint. So after that response comes in, we're now going to say dot then. So we're going to handle the data that comes in, right, from this return response.json. So the next thing that we're going to do is console.log, login successful, and we're going to put a colon and show the data. So in our what's it called here, in our console area in the browser, we should see login successful as well as the object which was returned as the response. And the next thing is we're going to display the text content. So the success message or text content is going to be equals to login successful, tokens received. Then we're going to put a colon there. And the success response, we're going to set the style to block. So instead of none, because it was none before, meaning it wasn't displayed, the next thing that we're doing is setting the display to block so that it can be displayed. And if we look at what we are doing here, we're trying to display the tokens in a div. Remember that we had created a div at the top called token display, and it has an ID of token display. And we got it using this variable by saying token display EL, which stands for elements. What we're just simply doing here, first of all, is we're trying to create a new object called token info. Now, inside this object, we just want to store the tokens which gets returned by saying data.tokens. Now, this tokens is going to come from this response right here, which we called tokens, from this key, right, rather, which we call tokens. That is why we are saying data.tokens, and we're just saying the full response is just equals to the data. So what that means is we're just going to grab the full response body. It's going to be the tokens plus the status of true. Then the next thing that we're just going to do is we are then going to, let me just indent this. We're then going to create some HTML which we are going to add to this token display element. So what that basically means is that we're trying to generate HTML which we're going to display inside this div called token display EL. So we're saying token display EL dot inner HTML, meaning we want to add some new HTML into the inner HTML of this div. So we're just going to use this. This is not code, by the way. Um, this is I've even forgotten the name of this character, but this isn't a token. It's beside it's right on the tilde key on your keyboard. So we should use that rather than using quotes. So we're going to put strong of access token. That is, we want this text to look bold. And then in there, we're going to put a line break. And then what are we going to display after the line break? We're going to display the tokens by saying token info, which is this object we created at the top, token info dot tokens. So we're trying to access the tokens which we created inside token info. So we're going to display this, but if it does not exist, we're just going to put not found. That is what this double symbol look like. That is it basically means or. So we're going to say this or this. So what that means is that if the tokens does not exist, then we're just going to display not found by default. Then we're going to put double line break, and the full response, we're just going to say JSON.stringify data null of 2. So we're just trying to format the data to look, we're just trying to format the data in a JSON format and display it in a way that looks, proper. And we're going to say token.style.display is equals to block, meaning we want to set the display as block so that it is no longer hidden. Then this is what is going to happen when we are able to grab all of the data from, when we are able to process all the response data that comes from our endpoints. But if an error occurs, that is why we have this does catch err. If an error occurs, then we want to console.log the error, and we want to set the error message div. We want to set the contents to an unexpected error occurred. Please try again. And we're going to set this to display of block because by default the display is none. So we want to add the text content into the div and we want to display it so that the user can actually see what happened. Then finally, after all of this has happened, we want to set the loading. We want to set the loading element to none. That is, if you look at loading, if we look at the loading element right here, we had set this to block at the start of the callback response so that it would show loading. But at the end, we're just setting this to none so that obviously the loading wouldn't show. So let's just save it. If you have any questions so far, please ask a question in the comment section and I will definitely reply you. But that is how the callback method or function is supposed to work. And if we scroll down, the last thing we now need to do, or the next thing we need to do, is initialize Google sign-in. So add the initialization code that runs when the page loads. So let's just copy this and then we head back to the index.html file. And right after this function, let me just put this here. Right after this function ends, I am then going to paste the initialization code again into this place. And I would like to indent everything properly. Let me just make sure I am indenting everything properly right here. Okay, so let us look at what is happening right now. Okay, so this isn't indented properly actually. So let me push all of this in. So I will just copy from here, highlight up until this point, and I will indent everything properly. So let's see. So this is a proper indentation of how everything is meant to look like. So let's take a look at what this function is doing. So window.onload basically means when the specific page is loading, we want to execute every single line of code that exists inside here. So we're saying if window.google and window.google.accounts, and now all of that is going to be coming from this library which we had added to the top. Remember that we had added this link so that we are going to be able to access Google's methods and functions actually. So let's just close this. We're now saying windows.google.accounts.id.initialize. So we're trying to initialize a new Google sign-in request. And what we need to pass into this place as parameters are, first of all, the client ID. Now, what we need to do is we need to head to our .env file and copy the client ID, which we got from Google. So just copy this. And once you've copied it, so let me make sure I copy this properly. So once you've copied it, just head back to your file and here replace that text with your client ID. Now you can go ahead and set up environment variables, but I'm just going to paste it here for now. And then the next thing is the callback. So the callback is the function which we had created at the top. That basically means that when it is a success, when it has been a successful request, what do we want to then do? We want to pass this function as a callback. So when the request has completed execution, it will then run this function and pass the response which we got from here to that function. So the function, as I had explained earlier, it performs some actions based on the response that it gets. And we're just going to say window.google.accounts.id.render button. So we're then trying to render out the sign in with Google button. And then this button is actually coming from the library that we have pasted at the top as usual. So we're saying documents.get elements by ID of Google sign in div. Now if I highlight that, we can see that this is the div that we created. it has an ID of Google sign-in div. So that button is going to be added into that div. So that is why we are saying documents.getElements by ID of Google sign-in div. So we're passing this div into this render method so that we are going to render that button inside that div. And we're just passing some basic styling. The theme is outline, size, large, text of this, shape of that. Then else, if it failed to make use of the window.google and window.google account, we're just going to display Google scripts not loaded. Please refresh the page. So that means that this script right here was not loaded properly, and you need to either refresh the page or make sure that this has been added to your HTML file. So let's just make sure it is saved and head back to our website. So when we head back to our website, what do you see? You see this sign in button which has been added here. Now, what do we now actually need to do to test this out? All we are just going to do is click this sign in with Google button, make sure our server is running. Now, once we click sign in with Google, notice what happens. This it brings up this pop-up that says choose an account to continue to DRF auth app. Now, remember that when we were creating our application, we had called this DRF auth app. So that is why we are saying continue, choose an account to continue with DRF auth app. So what I can then do is click this Google account. So when I click it, it is then going to say sign into DRF auth app. Then it will give us more info. Google will allow DRF auth app to access this info about you, your name and profile picture, as well as the email address. Now, this is coming from the scopes which we set in the data access. If you remember, I had explained that when we selected those two first items, it would give us access to the user's full name as well as their email and profile picture. So what we're just simply going to do next is click continue. Now, once we click continue, we can then see something beautiful that happens. So I think we are getting an error on the back end, but you saw basically that we got the response. We got the response from Google, which was the access token being printed out. But let's see the error that we got. So if we look at this, let's head back to our views first of all. And you see that from our views, when we run print ID info, we can see the data that was printed out in the terminal. So we can see the ISS is that we're not too bothered about all of those. What we're mainly bothered about is the email. So you can see that we're able to grab the email from here. Then we're able to grab email verified. We see email verified is equals to true. Then we see the name of Ayodeji Adeshola, which is the full name. We see the picture, which is this link right here. Then we see given name is going to be the first name. Family name is going to be the last name. Then we see the IET, and we see some other details that we're not too bothered about right now. But we just need to figure out why we got that error. So I think I have gotten why that error came. And so the reason why that error was happening was because we have not set up cause in our Django project, or we had not set up cause. So I have actually gone ahead and set it up, and I'll be showing you exactly what I did. So the first thing that you need to do to get rid of that error is run this command, pip install django-cause-headers. So I already have it installed, so that's why it's saying requirements already satisfied. Once it has installed, just head to your settings.py file, and the first thing that you need to do is add cause headers to your installed apps in your settings.py file. So just add it exactly like it is here, cause headers. Then the next thing that you need to do is add cause headers.middleware.cause middleware to your middleware list. Now make sure you add this to the top of the list. If not, it might not work. So just put it at the top of the middleware list. And then the last thing that you need to add is the cause allow all origins. Now, because we're actually still in development, we can just set cause allow all origins to be true. But if you want to restrict it to some certain endpoints or URLs or places, for example, URL endpoints, let's say you have clients who are running on different URLs, you are going to add this to cause allowed origins as a list. But since we're just in development, we're going to set cause allow all origins equals true. Then what we just need to do next is just to add that there and save it. So once you've saved it, head back to your terminal and run your Python server. So once the server is running, that error should actually be resolved now. So let's head back to the front end. That's the HTML file. Refresh and click sign in with Google once more. Now, once I click sign in with Google, I'm just going to select the Google account. And once I select that account, you are going to see the token gets printed here. And what do we have? We see the response from the backend. We see the full response. It is full response. And then the tokens are access. And the access starts from here and ends here. So this is the access token as well as the refresh. And the refresh token starts here and ends here. So you can also see that we have the status equals true. So the way we are able to see this is coming from this HTML file right here, where we had told it, where we had appended the inner HTML, and we display the access token as well as the full response. So that is why we can see the access token is an object, and then we see the full response is this is the object that actually gets displayed, which is tokens. And that is coming from our view when we told this to return this response. Now, what we can actually do again is go to our admin dashboard and refresh. So when we refresh, we can see that user. And when we click that user, we can see that the user is registered with Google and they are active. So you'll notice that even if I try to sign up again or sign in again, you'll notice that a new user object for this user doesn't get created because we had told Django to use get or create. So even if a user with that email already exists, we're just simply going to grab the user and log them in by returning the access and refresh token. So we can actually try that again. Sign in with Google, choose the Google account. Now, once we choose the Google account, we're going to see signing in, and we can see the access and the refresh token being returned. And if we head to the browser and refresh, you can see that that user is still there. So what we can actually do is, let's just test this in a different browser so that I can log in with a different Google account. So I'm going to save that, click sign in with Google, and here I am going to select a different Google account to sign in with. Now, once I do that, it's going to say sign into DRF Auth app. So the only time they will see this, like this prompt, is when they are trying to sign into our website for the first time. So because I'm using a new email, it's asking me this. I'm just going to click continue. Now, once I click continue, it's going to say signing in, and you can see it's returned back to us the access and the refresh token, then it's refreshed. So that is all we're going to talk about in this tutorial. When I refresh the dashboard, we can now see that that user has been saved to the database. So I can see the password is some long hash. I remember that we had said set unusable password. So this is just added for us. Then we can see the email which we got. We can see the first name, the last name. We can see the registration method is Google. And all of that was passed in from this place. So that is all we're going to talk about in this tutorial. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to leave it in the comment section and I'm going to reply you. Again, if you want to get all the code to this tutorial, as well as the README file, there's going to be a link in the description, which will take you to where you can find all of the code. It's take you to a GitHub repository. Now, I am also trying to build a community. So in the description, you're also going to find links to my Telegram channel, my Discord server, as well as my LinkedIn and my Instagram in case you want to reach out to me and send me any messages. Thank you for watching this tutorial, and I will see you in the next one.